So, Runaway, A Twist of Fate, the third game in the Runaway adventure game series by Pendulum. You people should already know that Runaway A Road Adventure is one of my all-time favorite adventure games, and Runaway 2, Dream of the Turtle is one of my all-time least favorite adventure games. So, how good is the third Runaway? Well, it falls somewhere in the middle. In fact, pretty much exactly in the middle. It's one of those adventure games that isn't really good enough, in my opinion, to really recommend to anybody, but it's not really bad enough to actually complain about, and that's really partly why I haven't talked about it. Partly also because until this year, I actually couldn't finish the game because it kept freezing at this particular moment in the game. Now, A Twist of Fate does follow the plot of Runaway 2, Dream of the Turtle, somewhat, but it does an obvious time skip into the future, where Brian has been convicted for the murder of General Kortsmeyer, the villain of the second game, and committed to a mental asylum where he is thought to have died, until at the funeral, Gina gets a phone call from Brian. Well, actually, the call is from someone else. But it turns out that Brian, in fact, is alive, and the entire bit about him murdering Kortsmeyer has been orchestrated by the second game's secondary villain, Tarantula, who is, I guess, this game's main villain. Now, I hear some of you wonder, didn't Runaway 2 have like aliens and stuff at the end? And yes, it did. But when you play A Twist of Fate, it becomes painfully evident that Pendulum themselves didn't seem to really like the story of Runaway 2. In fact, this is very much the case. It appears that when they started development of the third game, the entire studio had kinda gotten sick and tired of Runaway as a whole, which is why the plot of the second game, and really just how its events were supposed to play out, isn't dealt with until almost halfway through this game. So don't get me wrong, I don't mind the change of setting, but there is a lot about Runaway A Twist of Fate that I am not a big fan of. And chief amongst them is, unfortunately, the voice cast. Now I know this seems like an odd thing to complain about because it's not like Audio Gods' dub of the first two games were flawless or anything, and I admit a lot of my affection for those dubs really comes from the fact that these dopey dubs were just kind of part of my teenage years as a gamer, but seriously, it is a bit distracting to me how literally none of the voices in this game sound anything like the voices from the previous one. Andy Chase in particular doesn't have any of the nerdy charm of Mark Biaggi's Brian.
Kurgan, that psycho. Why would he have left this here? Well, at least he didn't take my candy.
That said, he's not the worst voice in the voice cast. Nope, that's Gina, voiced by Sharon Mann. Now, Sharon Mann is actually the voice of Kate from the Siberia games, and don't get me wrong, I don't think she's a bad voice actress. In fact, her voice for Kate works very well for that character. I get the feeling something might have happened in the localization of this game, however, because Gina comes off extremely whiny and annoying.
Great, here we go with the typical objects that don't work. No way, it must be full of dirt and dead insects. Enter password? How would I know what Chapman's password was?
Which is unfortunate because you do actually play as her for long stretches of the game. Which is kind of annoying because I usually like it when you get two playable characters in these adventure games. They did it well in Broken Sword and Gabriel Knight. I've always kind of wished they would have done it with Monkey Island, but now, in this game, Gina just comes off really, really frustrating. At least Barbara Scav Weber does a decent job as Tarantula and sounds pretty close to the way the character sounded in the previous game. Now, I hear all of you wondering, what about Joshua? Well, yes, Joshua is in the game. In fact, he's in the game's hint tool. But he has shaken off his accent mysteriously, which I'm not complaining about.
Stuck? Oh, that's terrible. This little game boggles the mind, doesn't it?
The hint tool, by the way, becomes pretty much your best friend in this game because some of the things that haven't changed from the previous Runaway games is that, yes, there is still a lot of pixel hunting. In fact, I'm pretty convinced at this point it was intentional. Joshua does drop you cryptic hints, and some of them are pretty helpful, but sometimes he just shows pictures of stuff you're supposed to click, and this is where you start to realize that the game really does expect you to just run your cursor over everything again. And I think this was a big mistake. Just because you're self-aware of the flaws of your game doesn't make them acceptable in my view. And the other part are all the movie references. Yes, I get it. The final puzzle of the first game was inspired by a reference to a Woody Allen film. And both of the first two Runaway games obviously were just filled to the brim with movie references. But in this game in particular, it started to get a little obnoxious. Like just frustratingly so. It's like, yes, we get it, Pendulo, you love movies. So the thing is, I get that they are trying to kind of reel back the story a little bit into something a little bit more down to earth. And don't get me wrong, there are still funny jokes and funny cutscenes in this installment as well. But because the characters don't really feel the same way they did before, it just doesn't feel very rewarding. And also, another thing that really frustrates me is that characters like Sushi, Rutger, and Saturn aren't even present in this game, even though they were in the first two. Like seriously, A Twist of Fate really feels disconnected from the other Runaway titles. The thing is though, it's not as frustrating as the second game. It's certainly way more playable, and the hint tool certainly helps a lot. The soundtrack's also pretty nice, with Vera Dominguez, the singer of Liquor who did the original Runaway theme, providing vocals for a couple of the tracks. It did have some features I wasn't a big fan of, like how the scenery sometimes changes when your characters walk around. I get that they were just maybe trying to make the areas feel a little bigger. The thing is, I can really only recommend Runaway: A Twist of Fate to somebody who played through the entirety of Runaway: Dream of the Turtle and really just wants to see how the story ends. But the wrap-up is so half-assed, it feels a little insulting. And it's not really a game you can jump into if you haven't played at least the first game. And it's frustrating to know that you would have to sit through the second game just to understand what's going on. But like I said, it's not a worthless game, and it does have its fun moments as well. It's just a very mixed bag of a title. I'm Hanu the Hande Mannequin, and see you on the next one.